I first began researching the topic of UFOs and aliens from the perspective of a religious researcher, realizing that many people have turned their belief in alien life forms into a religious belief system in itself. It was the Heaven's Gate cult suicide that got me started into this. This talk is nothing on that sort of topic. We'll be doing that later today. This is a very non-religious research lecture. And I never actually intended to become known as a Roswell incident researcher. It wasn't a calling I didn't believe. But because of the work I had in the field and the storefront I had downtown, I was asked almost daily, well then, what really happened in Roswell 1947? My website, RoswellUFOcrash.com, is my first answer to that, published in 2002. I'll show you a little bit of that later. And I appreciate everyone being here. I'm going to be presenting some new information for your consideration that is going to strongly argue that the Roswell crash was not the result of an alien spacecraft crashing in the desert. And I know that goes against what a lot of you already probably believe, especially if you traveled to Roswell for this whole event. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that you're even here this early in the morning to give this particular presentation a fair hearing anyway. Seriously, again, thank you all just for being here. And what I'm going to share, I'm simply boiling down, it's a theory, of course. There is no smoking gun. It's just data points that you'll put together in your own mind as this rolls on. I'm introducing you to the research of many, many other people based on findings that have not been that well known for very long at all. And they all add up to a pretty challenging interpretation of the events of 1947. In a perfect world, you'll just listen objectively and to what I'm positing today, and you can walk out of here making a personal decision whether you think this view has any real merit or not. And this same information that I'm presenting, this will lend itself to your understanding of why I don't believe that the Roswell incident was actually a weather balloon, as the Army Air Force stated in 1947, and nor do I believe that the Air Force's 1997 Project Mogul balloon explanation from their Case Closed book, that was their official final word on the Roswell incident. I don't believe that in 1997 has very much resemblance to the truth either. Okay, they first said it was a weather balloon in 1947 after the second press release, harmless high altitude. This is the 1997 Air Force Case Closed book that came out. If you're unfamiliar with these, I want you to know I'm in complete agreement with all the Roswell researchers that you're going to have access to in Roswell this weekend, wherever you go. I also agree that both this 1947 and the 1997 official explanations are so full of holes that we can call them just ridiculous fabrications. There's three main arguments in the ufology field pertaining to what really happened here. There's the alien hypothesis, of course, the weather balloon hypothesis, and this top secret mogul balloon hypothesis that they published in 1997. And those were the only three possible explanations. I'd actually argue that the alien hypothesis is the one that best fits the factual data and the credible eyewitness testimony from 1947. But there's a fourth hypothesis on the table now that's been gaining a lot of ground in the last decade. I'm one of many people that are presenting one version of this or another. 2002, my first stab at it was RoswellUFOcrash.com. I'm actually honored if you go online to Google, type in Roswell UFO crash or Roswell UFO, and I am either the number 1 or 2 match currently. Been battling out with Wikipedia over that. But that's for 5 or 6 years. And that's no shame in losing to Wikipedia. So you can see that a search result like this is showing that this view is at least becoming influential. Just like the lecture today, my website starts out with an overview of the facts, and then what I've come to call the official mythology, it's the popularized version of the Roswell incident that you're most likely familiar with. I'm going to be taking a crack at just shedding some new light on what you already believe are the basics, but I'm not nitpicking these details apart by any means. Debunking, that word, that is not my tactic here. I'm just going to share you a lot of unknown details about what our government and our military absolutely was in very highly compartmental ways, like the Manhattan Project, for instance, were in fact working on in 1947. The facts are in July 47, an unusual craft crashed in the desert of New Mexico. Number 2, the Roswell Army Air Base was involved in recovering that craft and possibly bodies. On July 8, 1947, the Roswell newspaper published a front-page article reading, Roswell Army Airfield captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Following orders, the military recanted the flying disc press release just hours later, claiming via the next day's paper that it was just a weather balloon. And fact number 5 is that the government has been lying to us about it ever since. As an example of that ongoing lie, this is from the 1997 Roswell case closed that I showed you earlier report, stating that the weather balloon was a top secret at that time, Project Mogul balloon. This was released in 97, 2 weeks before the 50th anniversary was celebrated here. They also added this bit about the crash test dummies being the explanation for the bodies that people reported. The problem with that is the researchers immediately pointed out, Stanton Friedman gets credit for saying this first, these dummies had, I think, not even been invented yet in 1947. But they were certainly not used by the Air Force until 1953 for anything. That is so easy a fact to verify. It's led many people already to conclude that not only was the Air Force lying, again, in 1997, but they wanted people to know they were lying. What I'm positing here is that they unofficially, even via the first press release from 1947, they want people, wink, wink, nod, nod, to believe that the incident was extraterrestrial, to cover up what was really going on. Some very ugly truths. Starting with Operation Paperclip. What you're looking at here is a group of 104 German scientists who were moved here to Fort Bliss, Texas, and to White Sands Proving Grounds, New Mexico. And they were previously working on some very interesting advanced flying craft prototypes for Adolf Hitler in the closing years and months and weeks of World War II. You can Google Operation Paperclip and just start with the Wikipedia entry if you don't already believe me. This photo I got off of NASA.gov. Warner von Braun is among the people here. I copied this picture from NASA, linked to my source, and then they removed the webpage, by the way, in 2002. I've now learned that little handy capture screenshot that comes standard on all of our keyboards. But Warner von Braun, he went on to head NASA's rocket program and take us to the moon. Historians now tell us that had Hitler gotten these working flying machines these gentlemen were working on into mass production, photos which I will be sharing with you, actual photos, before the Allies successfully invaded Germany, that we would have lost the war. The earliest and probably definitive books on the subject of the classified program that brought these men into the United States are The Paperclip Conspiracy and Secret Agenda. This is Tom Bauer's 1987 book, The Paperclip Conspiracy, The Hunt for Nazi Scientists. The review by the London Observer reads on the back of it, as the Allies moved into Germany, the full scale of the Nazi research achievements burst upon them. I skipped the part where they saw thousands of corpses. They overlooked the corpses and went straight for the technological marvels. They grabbed weapons, instruments, tools, files, and above all, scientists. There's also Linda Hunt's 1991 book, Secret Agenda. In the opening pages, she says this book would not exist if it were not for the Freedom of Information Act. Before 9/11, a lot of the now famous documents released to the UFO research field are via the Freedom of Information Act. But she describes in the opening pages of this book that the government fought her so hard on what she was digging up about Operation Paperclip that they actually presented her a bill for $239,000 in what they called search fees. Sounds like they were trying to scare her off. She had some good lawyers that were willing to go all the way with her, though. The gist of all of it is that when the U.S. and Allied troops were invading all of Hitler's secret bases in the closing months of the war, they came across such amazing technology that they wanted it. So those scientists were secretly brought into the United States under a media blackout and a program that literally paper-clipped fake bios on top of their Nazi crime dossiers, because President Truman was personally against putting certified Nazi criminals on the American payroll. President Truman expressly ordered no real practicing Nazis be brought into the U.S., but had that order been followed, even Warner von Braun and the other important scientists would have been excluded. Getting to the relevance of the Roswell incident on this, 1947, I need to credit Dr. Michael Heiser, PhD, and his book, The Facade, for pointing me in this direction of research. A lot of you know his name. He's spoken here in Roswell many times. And his book was first published in the year 2000. My site, Roswell UFO Crash, went online in 2002. And I'm going to share a couple of articles that you can still find online. They're linked to from my site, November 2005, which sum all this up very concisely. This is from BBC, 21 November 2005, Project Paperclip, The Dark Side of the Moon. Some excerpts from it, beyond what's on the screen. 60 years ago, the United States hired Nazi scientists to lead pioneering projects such as the race to conquer space. These men provided the U.S. with cutting-edge technology, which still leads the way, but at a cost. The range of Germany's technical achievement astounded Allied scientific intelligence experts accompanying the invading forces in 1945. And it was the U.S. and the Soviet Union which, in the first days of the Cold War, found themselves in a race against time to uncover Hitler's scientific secrets. Thus began Project Paperclip. The article mentions some details of von Braun's associates also brought into the United States. Arthur Rudolph, Chief Operations Director in Nordhausen, where 20,000 slave laborers died producing V-2 missiles, led the team which built the Saturn V rocket, described as 100% Nazi dangerous type. Kurt de Boos, rocket launch specialist, another SS officer, his report stated he should be interned as a menace to the security of the Allied forces. Hubertus Strugel, later called the father of space medicine, designed NASA's onboard life support systems. Some of his subordinates conducted human experiments at Dachau and Auschwitz, where inmates were frozen and put into low-pressure chambers, often dying in the process. Now, I want you to see this picture also in the article, which the BBC article has. Take special note of the reference to one of the captured flying craft, the Horton Ho 229. I've underlined this in red. That is not a photo of the Horton, but part of the popular mythology associated with the Roswell incident that many people have published is that our stealth aircraft, namely the B-2 bomber, was back-engineered from the Roswell 1947 crashed ship. It's now known that that's not accurate. With its radar-absorbing wings, carbon-impregnated plywood skin, and swept-back single wing, the 1994 Horton Ho 229 was arguably the first stealth aircraft. The U.S. military made one available to Northrop Aviation, the company which would produce the stealth bomber. All intents and purposes, a modern clone of the Horton, a generation later. The caption, the stealth bomber, based on a 1994 German design. Here's one of the oldest images of the Horton 229 from Wikipedia, from Germany, 1944. Now, I've got more pictures of that, but my point is to simply make you ask and answer this first question for yourself. Seeing these images, would you argue that the B-2 bomber that Philip Corso and others believed was reverse engineered from the Roswell crash was back engineered from alien technology or from German technology? Second article, published November 16, 2005, suggests that what modern UFO researchers, advocates refer to as the truth embargo, to use Stephen Bassett's term, or even Richard Dolan's phrase, the national security state, did not begin in 1947, as most people postulate, but the cover-up of Roswell actually began right here in 1945. Have you paid attention to the media blackout tone in this first paragraph? The front page of the New York Times on November 17, 1945, bore a curious, vague headline: 88 German scientists reach here, reputedly with top war secrets. The scientists had arrived on an ocean liner the day before, about 60 years before this was published, and been immediately whisked away aboard a fleet of buses. Unusual precautions were taken to keep the incident secret, and reporters who went on board the ship and found the 88 men waiting to land were warned away, the Times reported. The paper reported that the group's arrival was announced weeks earlier by the War Department to bring German scientists to America. In spite of the secrecy, the Times guessed right. Men who just 7 months earlier had been at war with the United States were being ushered into our shores by the government. The purpose: to jumpstart American high-tech industry. The article continues, these men and women, this is a little laborious, but it's necessary to lay this foundation, and then it'll roll after this. The men and women were in essence spoils of war, taken by the victor to benefit from the vanquished foe's history of scientific achievement. As Allied soldiers battled their way inland from Normandy, teams of technical intelligence gatherers followed in their wake. Their first real opportunity came after the liberation of Paris in August 1944, when competition among the Allies, particularly the United States and the USSR, but also Great Britain, France, Argentina, hold that thought for later, and Yugoslavia heated up. Rivalries grew fierce in the following months as countries hid information from one another and scrambled to snag the best equipment and talent for themselves. By early the next year, 150 scientists were working across the country at locations like Wright Field, Ohio. Anybody know the significance of Wright Field? Yeah, right. If you know your Roswell story, Wright Field is where the wreckage from 1947 was eventually taken. She continues, the Dora concentration camp had supplied slave labor for the Nordhausen missile workers, where prisoners had been fed a single piece of bread a day and literally worked to death by the thousands. Aviation doctors had suffocated gypsies in pressure chambers and force-fed Jews nothing but seawater for weeks to determine what pilots could withstand. The scientists drew little attention from the American press or public until 1957 when the Soviets launched Sputnik. Suddenly, all eyes were on our rocket team. The assertion that their Germans are better than our Germans, variously attributed to Bob Hope, Lyndon Johnson, and myriad presidential advisors. Some people knew about this. Bob Hope, celebrity, reminds me in the 80s we had Ronald Reagan, Johnny Cash, Bob Hope. Now we have Obama, no cash, no hope. But Paperclip left behind another darker legacy. The program's architects, post-1945, were sometimes willing to build on the results of often deadly Nazi research on captive human subjects. Intelligence and government officials faced a delicate moral quandary in 1945, whether it was worth it to give American homes to men who invented weapons to kill American soldiers, men who in some cases subscribed to beliefs that hundreds of thousands of Americans had died to eradicate. Last sentence, in the end, they decided it was, if these men could help the United States defeat the Soviets. So the author, Miss Gibson, here lays out beautifully the rationale for Operation Paperclip. And the fact that these two separate articles came out in November 2005 kind of indicates that whoever controls the press these days is kind of okay with the American people finding out about the Nazis on U.S. soil 60 years later. But I think you might be beginning to understand. Under no circumstances could that information be let out in 1947. What if you had just lost two sons fighting the Nazis? How would you react if in 1947 you find out they're living in the United States and eating well off of your tax dollars? All that I've just read introduces a topic I'll be getting back to later. These paperclip scientists were not only brilliant when it comes to technology, but they were both adept at and willing to perform experiments on human test subjects. Specifically, she said earlier, to determine what pilots could withstand. I'm warning you now, this lecture will take a very dark turn shortly. But back to this Horton. Here's the pictures I promised you. Those are from Germany, under construction in late 1944. Here's a modern recreation made for a film documentary. This 2009 National Geographic article documents the recreation of a Horton, noting, as many other sources, mass production of these things could have changed the course of the war. Wikipedia states that these jets exceeded 600 miles per hour in 1944, way faster than anything the U.S. had, and flew almost 50,000 feet. Here's the close-up of that. I know you wanted that. And these last pictures, they're just from a discussion thread, and they don't cite their sources, so I apologize if any of these are, inauthentic, but they're really good pictures. This is the one I'm not sure is truly authentic. This appears to be the one manufactured in the USA by Northrop. So we know that Germany had these vehicles in prototype production prior to the end of World War II. That's a fact. Anybody who wants to dispute this research or do the research themselves, you'll find you can't dispute this. But does that necessarily mean the American military had them ever? And what's all this got to do with Roswell in 1947? Here's some documentation from before 2005. This is a January 1946 document from Mike Heiser's website. You can get it online anywhere too. It originates from, looking at the top right, Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. Again, the Wright Field connection where the Roswell debris wound up. Added the red text just so you can read the small type. It's unclassified document now. This is the actual cover page that proves the United States Air Corps had a working knowledge of the German flying wings designed by the Horton brothers and was authorized to begin work on them here in the United States. If that little document is not enough evidence, here's a picture of one being unloaded from a train in August of 1945. The Wikipedia caption reads, "Unloading of a captured Horton Ho in the USA." The Wikipedia entry ends by saying, during the final stages of the war, the U.S. military initiated Operation Paperclip, which was an effort by various research intelligence agencies to capture advanced German weapons research and to deny that research to advancing Soviet troops. This was secured and sent to Northrop Corporation in the United States. Northrop was chosen because of their experience with flying wings, inspired by the Horton brothers' pre-war record-setting glider. Jack Northrop had been building flying wings in the United States since 1939. So why is all that important for today? There's two major reasons. If you didn't work, number one, for the Northrop Corporation or for the United States military compartment that brought this aircraft over here in August 45 from Germany, or if you weren't privy to the Operation Paperclip in the mid-1940s, odds are you wouldn't know that a craft of this type, or many others I'll be showing you in a moment, even existed, much less had made it to the United States for R&D. This is important for, number two, for this reason. Who knows who this is? It's Kenneth Arnold, the pilot who in June 1947, said that he witnessed some amazingly fast airships over Mount Rainier in Washington State. He described their flight characteristics as skipping like a saucer. And as a result, in June 47, the press first coined the phrase flying saucer, which is technically wrong. Many researchers often point today, Ken Arnold said it skipped like a saucer, but not that it looked like a saucer. Please keep your eye on the screen real quick here. I'm going to move. Now that we know that these guys were working on reproducing these craft for American use spread across these locations: Fort Bliss, Texas; Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio; White Sands Proving Grounds, New Mexico. Who would argue, or who here would now argue, that what Ken Arnold described in 1947 was really from outer space? This is where the word flying saucer was born, that sighting on the left. Some people that are really researched on the Roswell incident already know this part. I think it will interest many of you to know that the craft recovered around the Roswell region in 1947 was not